Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Man, it seems like only yesterday I uploaded Thomas and the Quest for Job. I mean, obviously it wasn't yesterday, it was a few months ago, just a figure of speech, you know. And yet the film has already reached 10,000 views. I cannot thank you guys enough for the outrageous support and reception that this film has received. It really took a lot of work, like a month to make, so I'm really happy that a lot of people enjoyed the film. So, as a thank you, I'm going to be sharing some behind-the-scenes stuff for Thomas and the Quest for Job. Now, before we begin, I will be spoiling the movie, so if you have not seen the movie yet, I recommend you doing that before watching this. I'll leave a link to it in the description. With that out of the way, let's begin. Now, every great movie starts out with some sort of rough draft, whether it be a screen test or an early screenplay, any of those. And Thomas and the Quest for Job is no exception. There was indeed a rough draft version of this movie, but it's not what you would expect. I'm a little nervous to talk about it because it's something that I've had a little bit of a rough history with in the past. However, I've recently been able to sort it out to the point where it shouldn't be a problem if I mention it in a video. So, here goes nothing. The rough draft for Thomas and the Quest for Job stemmed from a late-night hangout with some friends on Discord. Now, if you've seen the opening credits of the movie, it says that it's based on some random night with friends. And literally, that's what happened. Sometimes I call a couple of my friends up and we talk about stuff. And one night I was bored, so I just opened up 3D Movie Maker and decided to screw around, just tell a dumb story. And yeah, this was indeed the rough draft for Thomas and the Quest for Job. Now, there are a lot of differences here. A lot of differences. First and foremost, it wasn't animated. It was more or less puppeteered almost. I was just dragging everything around. Sometimes I did use the actual action function, but most of the time I just dragged everything around with the reposition. So yeah, it was not professional in the slightest. Again, it was being done on the cheap because it was just kind of on the spot, and it was just like, you know, a joke, obviously. So I wasn't going to go animating this thing in front of them. I was trying to tell a story. So yeah. Secondly, if you've seen the movie, you would know that Peter Griffin was the running gag of the film with the whole surfing bird thing, obviously. But in the rough draft, he only appeared at the beginning of the movie in the KFC scene. He didn't even get kicked out, he just left. If you're wondering why he continuously appeared throughout the movie, was because of the clip, the Family Guy clip at the end of the movie, kind of served as a post-credits, if you will. That little clip was in the rough draft because I made like a nice little edited version for my friends to watch afterwards. And yeah, that was in the rough draft, despite Peter appearing at the beginning of the movie and nowhere else. And the thing was, I wanted to keep that in the final film, and the only way I could keep it is if Peter continuously appeared throughout the movie. So yeah, that's why that happened, and I think it worked out pretty well. Next up, Pac-Man and Jasper did not have much screen time. If anything, they were barely important to the plot. Both of them appeared towards the end of the rough draft. Pac-Man first appeared during the part where Thomas was getting chased by Yoshi in a shoe, and Jasper appeared during the climax of the fight between Thomas and Dipsy. The issue with this, though, is that if I was gonna make this into a real movie, this would have to change. For one thing, Jasper would have to have a legitimate reason to fight Dipsy. So I had to figure out how to incorporate that. There's something else to that story, but more on that later. And as for Pac-Man, he still dies in the rough draft, and Thomas still gets emotionally crushed. And that really doesn't work, as Pac-Man was only on screen for like 5 minutes or so. That's not enough time to connect with a character. So I moved Pac-Man's first appearance to the beginning of the film and gave him a much larger role. That way his death would be more powerful, if you will. I don't know if it worked. I guess that's, you know, comes down to the person watching the video to decide that, but still, it is what it is. And then finally, Lou did not appear in the rough draft, probably because I didn't even create the mod for Lou at the time. There is some more stuff about Lou's development in the movie and even his inclusion, which I'll get to, but originally the whole backstory of Thomas wasn't there. If anything, there wasn't really much of a backstory, because again, this was just a rough draft that was made as a joke. I was just telling a story, and it just so happened that they really liked it to the point that I decided to make the movie. By the way, the friends that were with me were Squibber Tentacles 1997, UV Toons, Cartoon Fan 18, and Super Hershey Plushies Productions. More on them a little later in the video. I have gotten permission from them, and they have allowed me to do this, so if you're really curious about this rough draft, I'll leave a link to it in the description. Do not share it. It is unlisted, so don't share it. And please, don't bother me about Discord. I've turned off my messages, or I've changed my friend requests and messages so people basically can't do it, because I've had so many people try to pester me to call them, or they've requested stuff all over there, and it's not fun, needless to say. I only use Discord for close conversations with my friends and work purposes, like this, obviously. So, yeah, please don't get on my case about that. Moving on. So, if it ain't obvious, Microsoft 3D Movie Maker is an old software. It was made back in 1995, so obviously compatibility should become an issue as technology begins to improve, right? Well, for the most part, not really in the case of 3D Movie Maker. The program is still installable and playable on modern hardware, even Windows 11. To an extent. There are some little things that happen on Windows 10 and 11 that don't happen on older operating systems, but the main thing that killed any opportunity of me making this movie on Windows 11 was that after a long period of use, the program will crash. So, yeah, that is very inconvenient, especially if you don't save. So instead, I decided to make this on a much older operating system, that being Windows XP. And thank goodness for that, because if I had to make this thing on Windows 11, there's a huge chance that a decent chunk of the film could have been lost at any moment I was working on it. Okay, I know I risk turning away any new viewers who first watched Thomas and the Quest for a Job as like the first video they've ever watched on my channel, or people who specifically like Thomas and the Quest for a Job, but it's a risk I'm going to take because it does add some context to some of the jokes made in the movie. For the uninformed, I am typically a plush tuber. I know that's a thing that typically isn't really a major whatchamacallit anymore, but, you know, I personally enjoy it. I always enjoyed plush videos, and I've always wanted to make them, and I finally got around to doing it, sort of in 2018. It's a rough start. There's a whole thing about my history in the channel, so yeah, but needless to say, there have always been plush tubers, many of which are themed to specific franchises, typically Mario, Sonic, or Five Nights at Freddy's. But if you ask me, the underrated ones are the plush channels that incorporate multiple characters, even just random stuffed animals. That, in my opinion, is a treasure trove of undiscovered comedy. Which is why my plush series, Plush Brains, has a lot of random characters. And it kind of ties into the name of my channel, Mike's Toontown. In case you don't know, but then again, who doesn't know at this point, Toontown originates from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. In that movie, humans and cartoon characters, referred to in the film as toons, live alongside each other, and when toons aren't working, they live in a place called Toontown. And here's the thing, any character, regardless of the company they're from, lives there. And, you know, I've always loved that idea, so that's the reason why I have a lot of random characters from random franchises in the show. I just love that idea. So, it's natural that just to keep the movie familiar with some of my Plush Brains viewers, I had to put some references in there for them. One of them was the "don't ask questions you aren't prepared to handle the answers to" thing, which is said by Rocco in the movie. This line originated from the SpongeBob video game Battle for Bikini Bottom. Another joke was done with Ickis, where he says, "Cookie Monster, when did you get here?" This was a joke that I established in 2021 when I started this thing where Cookie Monster just seems to randomly appear out of nowhere, just kind of startling people. I haven't done that joke in a while, so maybe I should bring that back. And with that, that's pretty much all of the references. I'm sure there's other kinds of jokes that I've done in Plush Brains that I did in this movie, but those are the two major ones. I guess I didn't put much thought into this one. But then again, I might as well just talk about the references. That was one thing that I always tried to make sure when making this movie, just to include lots of references to TV shows, movies, pop culture, that sort of thing. Before we move on, I might as well show a little compilation of some of the references in the film that I'm proud of. And this isn't all of them. I'm not going to go saying all of them, but these are just a couple that I actually enjoyed implementing. So, yeah, take a look.
Hey, waiter! We're gonna need another one over here! Hey, waiter! We need another one over here!
I would like all of your meat. The answer is in the meat. Give me all the meat.
You know what? Screw this place! I'm going to McDonald's to get some fries!
So play McDonald's Fries Surprise today. It's the game with appeal. Appeal? Ha! I love potato humor!
You've destroyed my restaurant. Why would you destroy my restaurant? Why? You made a pancake, 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 pancake. Waffle pan!
What are you getting at? I'm gonna ask you this only once. Do you, or do you not, know about the bird? What the hell? 'Cause everybody's heard that the bird is the word.
Oh, well, a bird. Lois, I'm gonna ask you this only once. Do you, or do you not, know about the bird?
Oh, God.
Because everybody's heard that the bird is the word. Bird.
Did I ever tell you the story of the time I was a stripper? Mater, that's fucking gross. If I'm lying, I'm crying.
Do you have any croissants?
Why, yes, sir, we do.
Yes. Are you going to finish that croissant?
I'm Wallace, and this here is Larry the Cucumber.
This here is Larry the Cucumber.
'Cause you never know when he could...
All toasters.
Sorry, my fault. I was playing with the gun. Stupid of me. Hope I didn't break anything.
Hey, Mario.
Hey, paisan!
Sorry, my fault. I was playing with the gun. Stupid of me. Hope I didn't break anything.
And I've met a whole bunch of friends that all have the same dream. And it kind of makes us like a family.
And, well, I found a whole bunch of friends who have the same dream. And it kind of makes us like a family.
So as I mentioned before, what was essentially the rough draft was done with friends. And those friends actually gave me some weird suggestions when I was making that crappy rough draft version. And I'm gonna go through those right now because I'm not the one to be taking all the credit here. Those guys definitely helped with some of the scenes in the movie. Not productively, but definitely idea-wise. Is that really a good way to put it? I don't care. Cartoon Fan 18 gave me the most ideas, 4 to be exact, unless I'm forgetting one. The first one was Thomas using his teeth to get Spunky out of the toilet. That was just a random thing he said, and I just kind of made it happen in the rough draft. So I thought, why not? Let's include that. Another idea he gave me was for Fred Flintstone to be stuck in the toilet. Actually, truth be told, he didn't actually specifically say Fred Flintstone. He just said something else other than Spunky is stuck in there as well. But I just randomly decided Fred Flintstone when I was sticking the rough draft together in front of them. So, yeah, that's how that happened. The next idea he gave me was Patrick working at Mickey's Magical Chicken, which didn't even have a name in the rough draft. I was going by the in-game name, which was Chicken Chunks, or Chunky Chicken. I don't exactly know which one is the real one. They seem to switch. Whatever. I've said before that Patrick's inclusion was because there was no Goofy mod for 3D Movie Maker, but truth be told, that's a lie. Cartoon Fan 18 wanted to see Patrick in the movie, and I just thought, screw it, let's have Patrick work for Mickey Mouse. He'd be dumb enough to do that. And then finally, Dipsy's inclusion in the movie was his idea. Originally, I was actually just gonna do Blinky from Pac-Man, but I forgot to install that mod. Then I decided on Toad, but then he encouraged me to do Dipsy, and then obviously that turned into a big old shit show, so obviously it had to be implemented into the movie. So, yeah, again, thank you for the ideas, Cartoon Fan 18. The next person to give me ideas was UV-Toons, and UV-Toons was largely responsible for most of the Pac-Man show references, like the "this is a wrench" and the Pac Power stuff. That was his idea. He specifically brought those up when Pac-Man came onto the scene, or when Dipsy was about to die, but then Pac-Man died instead. So, naturally, I had to do that just to make him happy. And even though he did not specifically give me this as an idea, it kind of inspired it, so I might as well mention it here. The whole beginning with Ringo Starr and George Carlin, that was inspired by a little part in the rough draft where UV said Ringo Starr needs to narrate this, and therefore I put on my absolute worst impressions of Ringo Starr and George Carlin. Yeah, I already know, I said it for you. You don't have to remind me because I too think they're terrible. Next up is Squidward Tentacles 1997 in terms of ideas. By the way, these particular guys I'm going to be talking more about later on. You'll see why. But, yeah, he is a huge Muppets and Sesame Street fan. So there's one thing he demanded for this movie, and that was to have Cookie Monster in there. Originally it was going to be KFC. He wanted him in KFC, but, you know, that didn't really happen. And then when I got to All Real Monsters, the need for Cookie Monster really increased. And I was kind of hesitant of putting Cookie Monster in that scene, considering Oblina, Ickis, and Crumb were not fond of TV monsters, especially kid TV monsters, specifically. There's a whole episode, Monsters Don't Dance or something, where they encounter a character like a Barney the Dinosaur Cash Cow, Murray the Monster, and they are not fond of the idea of a monster entertaining humans and describing monsters as cute creatures. So that's why I was hesitant, but I thought, you know what, maybe I'll just say that the movie doesn't follow the logic of these shows. So yeah, that's what inspired the warning. And basically the entirety of the Cookie Monster scene, minus the high school stuff, was pretty much his idea. Like, mainly Cookie Monster being there, Cookie Monster being enemies with Thomas. That was kind of half his idea, because it just kind of was a coincidence that he kind of took that into that direction. And then Cookie Monster powing Thomas out of the ground, or through the ground pretty much, or punching Thomas through the ground. I said that wrong. Basically, that was his idea too. Nobody said this was going to be neat, people. Welcome to my channel. And then finally, Super Hershey was the one responsible for the Cookie Monster When Did You Get Here joke. I said that this was a joke from my plush series, but it's actually one of his favorite jokes from my show, so he didn't give me the idea, but he just said it at random in the rough draft, so that's why I was just like, you know what? Let's just put that in there. Now, before we move on, I do want to point out some scrapped ideas. One of these was from Cartoon Fan 18, and one of them was from UV Toons, so I'm going to go over those very quickly. Cartoon Fan 18's idea was for characters in the credits. Like, how would I compare this? Like the Simpsons movie, I guess. Where a character would walk out during the credits and commentate, whether it be about the credits or something. I thought about it, but considering how the credits were structured, I couldn't really make it work, so I had to scrap it. So, yeah, sorry. UV's scrapped idea was to include the "That's all fucks" ending from the Angry Video Game Nerd video about Bugs Bunny's birthday blowout. I heavily considered adding this just to give a comedic end to the movie, although, truth be told, I couldn't figure out how to really incorporate that. The only places I could really put it, it just didn't really work. So, as much as I didn't want to, I had to scrap it. Also, very briefly for anyone who's seen it, another friend of mine, a Clean 1954, made a fake VHS opening for the film, and the first trailer was a Cinemassacre trailer. I want to point out that that was entirely coincidental. I even told Clee after this, and yeah, that had nothing to do with the scrap joke. That was just kind of a coincidental thing that he was unaware of. It's funny how that works, actually. Alright, let's move on now. This movie was big. Not the biggest movie ever made in 3D Movie Maker, and I'll admit it wasn't the fanciest one either. There's far better work from people who have used 3D Movie Maker in the past, and virtual 3D Movie Maker, obviously. But, you know, still, it was a big movie. Therefore, if I was going to make this movie easier to make, I had to learn how to do some stuff. And the one thing that I've wanted to learn to use for a while, that I finally got around to learning, was 3D Movie Maker Animation Pro. This is a very useful software, and I absolutely owe it to this program for technically making the film possible. To demonstrate how this works, please enjoy this really crappy, even more unscripted clip of how, you know, this works. Alright, so this here is 3D Movie Maker Animation Pro. This is version 2.7. I don't remember the last time this program was updated, but whatever. This worked perfectly fine for me. So this software allows you to bind certain keys to some of the functions here. And it's really cool, actually. It's really handy. There are some downsides to it, but I'll get to that. So you could do, like, save, which I'm fairly certain it has a hotkey anyway, so I don't know why you do that. You can add frames, undo, tilt stuff, resize. The two that I used specifically for this movie were next frame and previous frame. I binded those to the left and right arrow keys. Now, by the way, I want to point out that while there are, like, default bind options, you have to bind them. You do have to bind a key to them in order for it to work. If it's just a default like this, it won't work. Like this one I didn't even mess with, but these two I actually have binded. So make sure you do that. And there were some other stuff that actually helped a lot. Like these first 12, whatchamacallits right here. This is actually an add-on for this program called Scene Ed, which allows you to animate certain things frame by frame. And this also allows... The ones I specifically used here were these move commands down here, which allowed me to carefully move objects and characters, like, by a pixel, like very small pixels. And let me just tell you, that was very useful. I had this, binded to the number pad, so that was useful. And then another one down here was word up down, which is these last two right here, and I bind those to the up and down arrow keys. So I'm going to activate this. So what you do is basically, once you bind the stuff you want, you click activate. And oh, by the way, I forgot to show this, but you got to make sure you have the window or the screen layout set correctly to how you use 3D Movie Maker. So if you have it in window mode, you got to make sure you set the program to window mode, or else it won't work. For the movie, I made this whole thing in full screen, but for this demonstration, we're on my Windows 11, and I'm showing this via windowed mode. So for you guys, it will be full screen anyway, so it doesn't matter. So here we are at the diner. I'm going to get a character out, and that character will be Barnacle Boy, and just a couple of mods loaded in. This is actually one of the mods that I made, not specifically for the movie, but, you know, he ended up in the movie anyway, so it doesn't really matter. So, what we do here, so, I select Barnacle Boy. Make sure you don't select, the resume last action command. You got to make sure you have this activated, the reposition thing, because if you do this, especially with an action, it will screw up the whole thing. So, I'm going to add some frames. I'm going to add 20 for now. And then what I do, put Barnacle Boy over here. Actually, no, I'll put him up close to the camera because it's more effective. So, with him selected now, with the reposition tool, I now press the key that I binded with the movement. And for that case, it would be number pad 6. And you see there, I can move him frame by frame. So I have, what I did, this is my preferred method. 4, I have left. 6, I have right. 5, I have down. And 8, I have up. And this also, the cool thing about this is that it actually works with up and down as well. So that's really nice. I'll explain what that's about in a little bit. But yes, that's really cool. It also works with shrinking and growing. That's really nice. And also it works with squash and stretch. And also all of the rotating stuff also does the same thing. But we're going to reset Barnacle Boy. And I'll show you the main meat and potatoes of this thing. And as I said before, I bind left and right, or the next and previous frames, to the left and right arrow keys. So, I'm going to go to frame 2. I'm going to hit 6 to move Barnacle Boy slightly to the right. And then slowly, I'm going to start doing this motion where I keep hitting the keys that I binded to do the next frame and to move him slightly to the right. You can see something's definitely going on here. And now, I'm going to rewind. And as you see here, he slowly moves. And that's how I was able to get those cinematic shots where something kind of zooms in on a character or something like that. And it's a good thing I learned about this too, because like I've known about this program for a long time, but I just never could figure out how to do it. That's kind of a thing with the 3D Movie Maker community. They all expect you to find this stuff out for yourself. And it's a little barbaric, but whatever. I was able to do it, so I ain't complaining, I guess. So, yeah. And this specific thing is very useful for, like, if you have a character with slow actions, especially if you rip them from a game, like what I did with Barnacle Boy. I ripped him from the All Production SpongeBob games, so his animations are a bit slow. So, like, run is fine. I don't really bother with that, because, like, that's kind of fine. A little slow, but not too bad. Walk is stretching it a bit, but it's still passable. In fact, actually, this other SpongeBob mod here, I didn't make this, but it's the same kind of deal, where it's ripped straight from the game with its animations, and they're about the same kind of thing here. But again, I've seen people use this mod no problem at all, and they've never minded or whatever. But the sneak action here, obviously, that's a little too whatchamacallit. So again, you could use that to your advantage. So I'm going to have him sneak up until frame 20, and then I'm going to move him 2 times over, or maybe no, 3 times over every frame. So next 1 2 3, next 1 2 3, and then I slowly try to memorize that. And you see here, he's slowly just like that, and then looks okay. Maybe 2 frames would have been good enough, but you still get the idea. It's not ideal, and for all I know, it might not even be required, but, like, you know, for a nice scene, that's definitely something you want to do. And then as for word up down, we go to the 3D whatchamacallit. So usually with these color palettes, you have to painstakingly keep scrolling through, and especially if you have, like, an expansion pack at the, you know, whatchamacallit, a texture expansion pack enabled. Yeah, that's gonna be a problem, because you gotta scroll all the way to the bottom of this list. You could also hold the button down, and it just kind of auto-scrolls like that, but even then, it's still slow. So, the word up-down script allows you, what it basically does is that it clicks this 4 times instantly. So I press down, and as you see there, it scrolls down every 4. Now, you won't be able to see the action of what's going on here on Windows XP, but I decided to do it on Windows 11 just so you can get the fair idea. It's not entirely reliable. Like, if you do it too much, it will keep inputting that. Like, I'm not holding the key down, as you see there. But it's definitely a nice way to get to the bottom of the list. I should point out that this script is actually broken. Okay, let me just wait for that to get finished. Yeah, so I should point out that this script is actually kind of broken, or at least where I got it from. The person who made it, I'll give them credit at the end of this little segment. Apparently, they screwed up the coordinates or whatever, of where the mouse is supposed to land. So it's a little bit lower to the point where it selects the colors, or the whatchamacallits, and then it also selects the slot machine instead of the splot machine. What, I said that wrong. Instead of the arrows. So I actually had to put that in a notepad and fix the coordinates, and I was able to get it to work. So if you've known about this whatchamacallit and you've had trouble getting it to work, I'll leave a link to a functioning version in the description. I'm not taking any credit here. The credit still goes to the person who made the script. I just kind of fixed it, but still, it was mainly his script. So still, I'm not the whatchamacallit. I'm not the one to thank here. But yeah, now there is one problem to this program as a whole, and that is any keys you bind that are, like, programmed for other things in this game get overridden. Or, like, basically, 3D Movie Maker Animation Pro overrides any commands that the regular 3D Movie Maker has. So, like, for example, if I wanted to type, like, numbers in here with the number pad, but I've binded something to the number pad, it won't work. As you see there, my mouse is moving around because it is, you know, it's binded to the screen ed stuff. Now, that's not a big problem with number pad because the top keys, the top number keys on your keyboard, still work. So, basically, yeah. So, yeah, that's pretty much a long example. Another example is that I can't move him up and down with the, whatchamacallit. So, then again, I think that's when you place somebody, Filbert. And then, yeah, you see it there. Usually, you'd be able to slowly move him up when you're dragging him for the first time with, like, the up and down arrow keys. but since that's overridden by the word up down, at least in my case, I won't be able to do that. So yeah, this is already a weird site for a demonstration, but yeah, that's all I have to say about 3D Movie Maker Animation Pro in this very dumb, unscripted example. But that wasn't the only thing that helped make this movie happen. Let's discuss that. Yeah, I told you that was messy, but that really helped with, like, up-close shots and, like, you know, when a character had to talk, but I couldn't use an action with them. Mainly Thomas. Because originally I was just going to do it by hand, and that was going to be painful. I was going to finish the movie first, then go back and do all these little details. But thanks to 3D Movie Maker Animation Pro, that made a lot of things easier. And again, screen ed and word up down most certainly helped. Another thing was making the Buff Thomas mod. Now, this was something that I was thinking about trying for the movie, trying to modify one of the default actors. In this case, it was Bo, the boxer, and yes, this was a difficult process. It's a good thing I made this movie on old hardware because it really called for old hardware. I wouldn't have been able to figure this out if it wasn't for a tutorial video, so thank God for that. I'll be giving credit at the end of this segment, so don't worry. Also, I don't know how useful it will be, but if anybody wants this piece of crap, you might find a link in the description. I don't think you really want it, but if you want it, then whatever floats your boat. The next tool that came in handy was PYQ Master. Now, technically, this program was based on another program called HiQ, which basically imports high-quality sounds, or at least 16-bit sounds that aren't compressed, into 3D Movie Maker. It does increase the file size by a large margin, but it's very useful. It's one of the programs that was used to create the Battle for Bikini Bottom music pack. I had to put that in a movie file because I don't know how to make a VXP file out of that, so yeah. Thankfully nobody has criticized yet, although now that I've mentioned that, I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of hate messages over at 3dmm.com. You gotta be careful over there. Another program that helped in the making of that pack, and also other music strategies, was 3dmm Pencil. This also helped with the making of the Buff Thomas mod, and this helped me tremendously for one reason. Changing sound effects into music, because as you don't know, the music in the game is MIDI. It's all MIDI stuff, and you can import MIDIs, which I considered doing, but I decided against it. And here's the thing, apparently, the thing can handle, like, audio tracks for music. It's just that there's none of that in the game. Maybe there is, and I'm just not sure about it. But needless to say, there is a way to make, like, sound effects into music, and that's what that program helped me out. And that helped tremendously with scenes like Reflections and I'm on My Way. The opening credits and the Let's Get Ready to Rumble part, I changed the music files for that as well, but they were created when I was using the music as sound effects. And the difference between using a long music track as a sound effect opposed to a music file, basically, a music file, if you pause and play again, the music will resume where it last left off, whereas a sound effect, it just stops entirely, and the only way to listen to the whole thing with the music is to start at the point where the music begins. It's complicated, and let me just tell you, if I had to use that method for Reflections, that whole scene probably would have gotten cut. So, yeah, thank God for 3dmm Pencil. And that is all of the tools that I experimented with to make this movie possible. And, of course, I'm not the one to thank here, obviously. I'm going to give credit to all the people who made these tools. I'm fairly certain most of these people aren't even on the internet anymore, but screw it. The first person to credit is Travis Wells. He created the 3D Movie Maker Animation Pro software, which, again, helped a lot if you couldn't tell. He created 7gen Package, which was used for importing mods. That was very helpful when it came to creating custom actors and such. Even though I didn't use this tool, I might as well credit him anyway. He also created HiQ. Don't know who created PYQ Master, but I'll give credit, just say that I don't know who did that. And then, of course, he created Virtual 3D Movie Maker, which was the mod loader for 3D Movie Maker. That was another big thing that helped out a lot, obviously. It's a mandatory software, obviously. Next up is Frankie Weindl, when I'm saying that, I'm not good with names, people, I'm sorry. He was responsible for the 3D Movie Maker expansion pack, which included some random stuff, 3D Movie Maker Pencil, and the Nickelodeon expansion pack, which was an unofficial expansion that imported most of the stuff from Nickelodeon 3D Movie Maker into 3D Movie Maker itself. I did use Nickelodeon 3D Movie Maker for some animating of faces, or like some facial animations, namely Ren, Oblina, and the Grumble, since there's certain parts of their faces that can't be changed with the unofficial expansion pack. Namely, Ren's mouth, the Grumble's eyes, and Oblina's mouth. Will Burr, that's funny, was responsible for Screen Ed, which was obviously the 3D Movie Maker Animation Pro add-on, and Stefan, I don't know if I'm saying that right, was the creator of Word Up Down, and again, even though I fixed the script, he should take all the credit. It's still his whatchamacallit. And then finally, I have to give a huge shout out to the 3D Movie Maker modding community. Specific thanks go out to Toonsville, who not only created most of the mods in this movie, including Thomas, but he also created the tutorial used to create the Buff Thomas mod. So, thank you very much for that. It's a blue moon to see tutorials in the 3D Movie Maker community, because most of the time, you gotta figure out this stuff for yourself, which is kind of what happened with this movie, but still, I very much appreciate that. So as I said before, I like the idea of Toontown. I like the idea of multiple properties being in the same town, living together and all that. Granted, this idea is not original when it comes to 3D Movie Maker. Other people like Toonsville have done stuff. There was a show called Cartoon Land as well. I forgot who made that, but that was another thing. Basically, the idea of multiple cartoon characters or animated characters or puppets or whatnot living together in one town is nothing new to 3D Movie Maker. But you know what? Screw it. I wanted to go for a Toontown kind of thing anyway. I was even considering calling the place Toontown, but I decided against it. So with this in mind, I decided on one thing. I was going to try not to use any default actors, because all of these other people have used, like, default actors in their Toontown scenario shows. Like, they've used Bongo and Augustin, so, like, you know, it's not really, like, completely. But then again, you could argue these are not really real people. They're a part of the game, so they're technically game characters, but I don't know. They look too real enough to be considered cartoon characters or toons or whatnot. So I heavily decided to not use any of the default actors. There was only 1.5 that really ended up getting used, and that was Fabrice the Rat and half of Bo the Boxer. Fabrice was obviously used as the Rats, obviously. That was a reference to the Rat movie, which is a great 3D Movie Maker movie. I was in no way trying to make fun of it or insult it by having the rats get run over. That was just done as a funny little joke. Just like, are we watching the right movie here? I have nothing against that movie. It's a fantastic movie, and I recommend you watch it. But yeah, I decided to give Fabrice the pass because he's just a rat. And, like, you know, there's plenty of non-anthropomorphic rats in cartoons, like Rugrats and whatnot, so is there gonna be much trouble if there's a non-anthropomorphic rat in a Toontown kind of place? I think not. Besides, I was already using mods for a cow, a chicken, and some hounds, so you know what? Fabrice wasn't too out of the ordinary. As for Bo, you could argue I broke the rule because I used his body or him as the basis for Buff Thomas, but, you know, at the end of the day, it was still technically Thomas, just with a buff body, so that one's kind of up for debate, I suppose. I myself don't think it fully breaks it since it's still Thomas in a sense, but I don't know. Take your pick. So yeah, in a sense, I only used like 1.5 default actors, and even then they weren't really that into the realistic side, if you will. I don't know, I guess that's up for debate, I'm not sure. However, I actually did consider adding 2 more default 3D Movie Maker actors. One of which was Skelly the Skeleton. This was after I decided on no defaults, and I decided, you know what, since Skelly is technically just a generic skeleton, that also kind of plays into the same thing as Fabrice the Rat, where, I mean, you see plenty of cartoon skeletons, so why not? It was about a joke about no default actors. It was meant to take place after Rocco died and before the Hounds got released, and the giant tombstone was supposed to be Skelly's tombstone. But yeah, I decided against that just for the sake of pacing reasons. And then the other default actor I considered was Jersey. And get this, he was originally going to be the costume that Lou wore. At one point, I even considered modifying Jersey's model to have Lou's head. But there was a problem with that. I still had to make the Lou Pickles mod for the flashbacks. So why would I just bother with that? It's better off for him to take off the whole costume rather than just taking off the mask. So that was the direction I was gonna go, but then I remembered something. Jasper had a very small role in the rough draft. That was killing Dipsy. I still had to give Jasper a bigger role, and I completely forgot about that. So considering they looked very similar, I just scrapped Jersey, came up with the no defaults rule, and made Jasper take the role instead. And honestly, that was the big brain moment of the movie. I'm glad that I decided on that, otherwise that whole Dipsy thing would have been a mess, needless to say. I'll also give a honorable mention to Colonel Sanders. He's not a default 3D Movie Maker actor, obviously. It's a mod built off of one, but he's not a toon. He's not a cartoon character. He was a real person. I mean, sure, there's plenty of commercials that treat him as a character nowadays, but the point still stands. He was a real person. So that's kind of the one thing that really breaks the whole Toontown rule. I guess maybe if you think about it, maybe Thomas was working in a KFC that was in Toontown, and then that's why he was able to get to Hollywood, and basically, you know, I'm adding lore to my own movie when it's absolutely not necessary. That's something that you're not really supposed to think about since, you know, and even then, I guess the whole Toontown thing kind of fell under with some characters dying. I mean, some of them came back to life, so that's kind of the, basically, if you want to add lore to my movie, go ahead. I ain't gonna do it myself. It's not fun that way. Alright, moving on. This next section is dedicated to the guest voice actors and actress of the film. I did not intend on having guest voices in the film at all. Originally, I was going to voice most of these characters, or some of these characters weren't even planned to be in the film at all. On the one hand, I wanted to do this all by myself because I wanted to show people that I was capable, but then I thought that could get boring to some people, and I feel like, you know, changing it up with a couple of different voices would help the film, and needless to say, it did. It really did. So I decided I want to go through and give special thanks to all the people and go over which characters they voiced, how they got those roles. Let's have some fun. First up is Cartoon Fan 18. As I mentioned, he was in the rough draft. He typically does shit posts on YouTube. He does some drawings sometimes, but typically you'll see him doing shit posts on YouTube. I think I met him either on YouTube or Twitter, X, whatever, either in 2020, I believe. I think it was 2020, actually. I'm not too sure. But we didn't properly meet until 2021 on Discord. He ended up voicing Carl Weezer because, he does a Carl voice sometimes when we hang out, and I personally enjoy it, so I decided to give him that role. So, yeah, thank you again for doing that, man. Next up is the only voice actress in the film, Jane. She was referred to something else before. She sometimes goes by the name Funky Nothingness, so that's why that was in the credits. She doesn't really do YouTube anymore. She typically did shit posts. I think she may sometimes use it. I'm not sure. I met her back on Discord in 2021, and she voiced Lois Griffin. And there's actually, believe it or not, there's actually a whole story involving Lois's inclusion in the film. So, in the rough draft, Lois was not there. All of the other Griffins were in the movie. You know, Peter in the KFC, Meg being a part of the circus, and although they didn't appear in the movie proper, there was this whole ensemble gag at the end of the rough draft, and Chris, Brian, and Stewie were all a part of that. But Lois was nowhere in the movie, not counting the Family Guy clip at the end. So this was brought to my attention when my friends were re-watching the spruced up version of the rough draft that I gave to them for personal viewing. They mentioned, hey, we have all of the Griffins in this movie, except for Lois. And at that point, adding Lois to the movie became a necessity. And originally, I was just gonna put her in the same vein as Stewie, Brian, and Chris, just a background character. And that happened with the Let's Get Ready to Rumble scene and the I'm on my way scene. But then I had an idea. A Family Guy cutaway idea. And the perfect place for that was after Peter gets kicked out of KFC. And I'm thinking that there should be someone mad at Peter for getting kicked out. And what other character to be more appropriate for the job than Lois? Issue is, though, Lois would need to talk. And I could have squeezed out a Lois. I was going to. But Yeah, it wouldn't have been pretty, let's just say that. But then it dawned on me that Jane actually did a really good Lois voice. So I messaged her about the movie, and she was super excited to join. Thank you so much. You blew it out of the water with Lois. You did a great job. The next person to appear is Squidward Tentacles 1997. Now, much like me, he too also does plush videos. He has a show called Kermit and Friends. I met him back on YouTube in 2020 or 2021. I don't really remember. Now, it's funny because the two characters he voiced actually are kind of connected to his show, Kermit and Friends. One of the characters he ended up voicing was Squidward, which is actually perfect because he actually had Squidward in his show, so there was nothing too out of the ordinary there. And then he voiced Miss Pac-Man. Now, for Miss Pac-Man, I wanted the stupidest voice possible, and one voice that I find unintentionally funny from his show is his Mrs. Puff voice. So I actually decided, you know what, I told him I specifically want your Mrs. Puff for the role. And he actually does this thing to get into character where he can't really get into character when he does like gameplay videos or like voice acting unless he has the physical character present. And I actually have this little video of him doing the line with his Mrs. Puff, so here you go. Pay your child support, jackass! You may notice that there was a bit of a pause in there, unlike the movie. I removed that for the sake of pacing, but regardless, man, you still did a fantastic job. In fact, during the part right before where Pac-Man appears, you may see Mrs. Puff across the street near the cafe. That was a little nod to the fact that Miss Pac-Man shared the same exact voice as Squidward Tentacles 1997's Mrs. Puff. So, yeah. Again, you did a fantastic job with that line, man. The next guest voice to appear in the film was Matthew Chesser. Now, Matt typically does all sorts of random stuff, many of which I've done myself, and he usually ties them together with 3D Movie Maker segments. So needless to say, he was a mandatory addition to the cast. I met him back on YouTube in 2020. I don't know why I'm saying back on YouTube. This is on YouTube. Okay, whatever. He ended up voicing the TV announcer for CSI SpongeBob Edition, not the news. That was me. And they also voiced Shrek, which was easy since he also had Shrek in his show. So, yeah, you did a great job, Matt. Thank you very much. The next person to appear was Super Hershey Plushies Productions. Now, by that name alone, it's obvious he does plush videos. He's responsible for a show called Toony Plushies. I met him on YouTube in 2021, and much like Cartoon Fan 18 and Squidward Tentacles 1997, he was also present for the making of the rough draft. So needless to say, putting him in the movie was also required. I decided to give him the voice of Ickis, which I assume would definitely be a very odd role for him, since he's a huge fan of classic cartoons like Looney Tunes and Mickey Mouse and Woody Woodpecker, and there's not really a lot of those mods. The only ones really are Mickey and Donald, and yes, there is a Marvin the Martian mod that I did from a Quake 2 mod, but that was after the movie was finished, so... or at least during the film's production, and the movie was far enough into development where I couldn't really include him, so yeah, aside from those three, not really, and besides, I was planning to voice Mickey myself, so I assume it was a weird choice for him, but the reason why I gave him the role of Ickis was because of the whole Cookie Monster when did you get here joke. I specifically wanted him to voice that. Since that was one of his favorite jokes from my show, I thought it'd be only right for him to do it, and you did a great job, man. Next up is Toons, the final person involved with the making of the rough draft, or at least being present for the making of the rough draft. You know what I mean. Much like Cartoon Fan 18, he also does some drawing, but typically on YouTube he does shit posts. I met him back in 2019 on YouTube. That was almost 5 years ago, holy crap. And he voiced Sir Topham Hatt, or as he's known in the UK, the Fat Controller. Yeah, I'm American if you couldn't tell. For the sake of this video, I'll call him the Fat Controller, just not to upset any of my UK viewers. It was very mandatory for UV to voice the Fat Controller, mainly because UV himself is from the UK, so it was very fitting. Some of you could argue, why didn't I let him voice Ringo Starr or Wallace? Well, you know, again, there's a reason for that, but I'll explain that once I talked about everybody. And some of you may notice I did voice Sir Topham Hatt, the Fat Controller. Sorry, again, I'm American, that's my thing. I did voice him in the trailer, and you might think that kind of ties into the whole thing that I wasn't planning on having guest voices. Actually, it wasn't. I decided to do that just for the sake of a trailer. I don't know if I've said this before in the video, but I tried to pull out all the stops to make this movie as cinematic as possible, and one thing that fits that agenda is having the trailer not reflect the final film. A lot of the scenes that you saw in the trailer, in contrast with the movie, those were final. I mean, not final, but you know what I mean. Basically, they didn't reflect the movie at all, in the slightest. It was all trailer stuff. So, yeah, there's your little explanation there. Regardless, UV, you did a fantastic job. The next guest voice was Dan the Toon Man. Now, he actually does art and animation. He's created a little character called Lightning Bug, and he also has done voice acting for other people like Chris Pratt, believe it or not. Anyways, I met Dan on Discord in 2021, and during the film, Donald, he voiced Donald, by the way. I completely forgot to say that. He voiced Donald, and I didn't really intend on using Donald until I came up with a joke to really show Mickey's true colors. And, that's when I was like, oh, I can't do a Donald. Like, look, I could probably squeeze out a Lois, but I could not do a Donald. Like a... Yeah, that's as far as I could get, basically. And you would not want that, trust me. Especially with the compression. Hell no. So, yes, needless to say, I was kind of stuck there. But then I remembered hearing Dan do a really good Donald Duck, so I reached out to him, and he was pretty excited to join. There was a bit of, confusion during the whatchamacallit. I typically like giving context to the scenes, and obviously scripts, obviously, that's the best thing to do. I unfortunately didn't give him enough context to work with, so he was a little confused, but regardless, it all worked out in the end, and he still did a very outstanding job. Dan, if you're watching this, I am terribly sorry for that inconvenience. You still did a fantastic job. I cannot thank you enough. Next up is ToonFan91. Now, he too also does animation and drawing, and he also does plush videos. He has a show called Blue and Friends Plush, and I met him on YouTube in 2021. He voiced Homer and Garfield. Now, honestly, truth be told, I'll admit this, and I haven't even told him this, so if you're watching this, Toon Fan, you're gonna learn this for the first time. I originally didn't intend on having him voice Homer and Garfield. Originally, I was gonna have him voice Jeff the Giant Smurf at the end of the movie. The thing is, though, I decided against it mainly because of the I don't know how to emote part. I don't know how he would have handled that, so I was better off doing that because I had a better idea of what I wanted to do. So, yeah. So, instead, I was kind of stuck on what role do I give the Toon Fan. Then I heard that one of his dogs, or like one of his family members' dogs, passed away during the making of the movie, and that hurt me a lot, because I personally am a huge dog person, and I hate to see anyone lose their dogs. So, as a little whatchamacallit, I decided to give him a little more. I gave him 2 roles, and he ended up having the most lines in terms of like vocal dialogue stuff, and those characters were Homer, Simpson, and Garfield. I was originally going to voice these characters, but I decided to give him these roles just as a way to show that, you know, I'll give you a little more. I know that sounds wrong, honestly. I mean, I shouldn't be letting someone work during... Basically, I wasn't trying to go in that direction. I was just kind of doing that as a, He was happy to do it. He likes doing stuff with me anyway, so it doesn't really... I don't think he was upset or anything. This sounded so weird. Basically, yeah, and it wasn't really a big deal since he actually has Homer and Garfield in his series, Blue and Friends Plush, so it was right at home for him. So, yeah, that worked out really well in the end. Next up is Swambo Entertainment. He also does plush videos. At least he used to. At the moment, he's kind of like in a pickle at the moment. He kind of really doesn't know what he wants to do at the moment. He had a show with, by the way, Swambo stands for Super Woody and Mario Bros. Official. So, obviously, it was a show involving Woody from Toy Story and Mario, obviously. Yeah, I think he's kind of, I don't know what the exact situation is. I don't know whatever he's deciding, but whatever he does do, I hope it works out for him, regardless. I decided to give him a role in this movie just to kind of get his name out there. Hopefully that would help him. I met him on VR Chat in 2022. Also, like Discord, please don't bother me on there. I don't even play that game that much anymore. Please, I beg you. He ended up voicing Woody. I wanted to keep things familiar with him since he had Woody as one of the main characters on his show, obviously, so I thought that would be nice. So, yeah, that worked out really well in my opinion. Next up is Clee1954. He does all sorts of random stuff, like YTPs, unboxings, plush stuff, random shit posts. As I mentioned, he did that fake VHS opening for Thomas and the Quest for Job. And I met him back on YouTube in 2018. He's one of my oldest viewers, my longtime viewers. That was back when I had, like, what, 40 subscribers? Basically, if there's anyone who has seen the evolution of this channel, it's him. Needless to say. So, of course, I had to have him in the movie. and I had him voice Buzz Lightyear. Now, for anyone who was confused on why Buzz sounded like Arnold Schwarzenegger and said, "Get to the chopper," it's because it's based on a joke from other plush tubers of the past, namely Banjo-Kazooie plush and Garrett Darkstar. Granted, these two do not make plush videos anymore. In fact, the former of which is no longer making videos at all, period. But basically, they came up with the idea of Buzz Lightyear talking like Arnold Schwarzenegger. And after they stopped making plush videos, Klee took that idea. So it's kind of his thing right now. So, of course, I had to implement that. Trust me, if you've never seen the idea of Buzz talking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, watch any of the people I've just talked about, please. And then we move on to the final guest voice, so to speak, and it was for Mr. Burns' Hounds. Mr. Burns' Hounds were played by Otis, and if you don't know who that is, he is my dog. Yeah, my dog did the barking for Mr. Burns' Hounds. He is a plot hound mix, so naturally he barks a lot. It's obviously in his breed. So I actually did a little trick. Yeah, he's a trick where whenever I say TV, he barks. So I just did that a couple of times. I got a couple of barks. With the use of Audacity, I actually grouped a bunch of them together to give the illusion that multiple dogs were barking. So that's how that was done. So in a sense, Otis had the most lines or sounds recorded. Since obviously he's technically family, I might as well mention when he was born. He was born in September of 2013, and we adopted him a few months after that, and he is a very loyal dog. I love him so much, and this is definitely like I think this was honestly my favorite thing of the movie, just kind of having him in there, just as a time capsule, just to remember him by, because, you know, dogs don't have, their lifespans are not too long, honestly. It's really sad. But regardless, those are all of the guest voices, voice actress, and voice pet, I guess. Now, you may notice they only had, like, 1 or 2 lines. I mean, 4 in Toon Fan's case, and, like, I think 8 for Otis, if you count all the individual barks that were recorded. So, yeah, the reason why I gave them very little lines, one of them was not really happy with the amount of lines. I'm not going to name specifics here, but the reason why these people didn't have a lot of lines was just because they were kind of like guests. It's in the name. They're guest voices. I couldn't really afford to cast any of them in major roles. I'm sure it's doable, but for me, my experience, it's not an easy task. I've done it before, but it was for a significantly shorter video. And there was supposed to be a big movie I was making with someone else, but that went down under mainly because the whole audio thing got out of control. Because I'd have to record their lines and then import them and sort them out. It was a mess. I'm not getting into it here. There was something else that also killed the movie, but I ain't gonna talk about it here because it's a touchy subject. But yes, those are the guest voices that participated in this movie, and I cannot thank them enough. Please go check them out. You can find them in the description of the movie. So, yes, I cannot thank you all enough for your amazing contributions to this movie. Thank you all so much. Okay, people, nobody's perfect, and I'll admit that I was most certainly not perfect making this movie because there were some mistakes. Most of them were caused by the pure fact that I was just trying to get this movie done. The movie was far enough into production to the point where I could announce a release date, or at least I was determined to get it done by a certain time. So, needless to say, things were kind of speeding up a bit. So, let's just go over those. Most of them are just grammar issues. I am not good with spelling, so bear with me here. One of them was advised. I noticed this during the premiere, and needless to say, it was an embarrassing oversight. The S I made a D. That was embarrassing, needless to say, and that was one of the last things I did for the film, so again, that's kind of part of it. Another thing that was towards the end of the film's production was the final scene where Thomas meets the Pickle Juice Circus. That was supposed to be taking place during sunset. And I forgot to add the giant block, or whatever, the giant flat landscape piece for the sky. So that slipped under the radar. I guess it's not too much of a mistake. I mean, it is a mistake, don't get me wrong. But I don't think anybody was really bothered by that. So, yeah. Next up, I misspelt Dipsy's name during the cast of characters in the credits. Embarrassing. The P and the S are backwards. That is... Yeah, that was an embarrassing. Even more embarrassing was when I misspelled Comedy Central when I was giving credit to the Ren and Stimpy show and the property of thing. Yeah, and I'd say this is the worst of all because it got noticed by somebody in the premiere. So, yeah, that was very unpleasant. Also, as a side note for anyone who was wondering, the title of the movie was not a grammar issue. I intentionally did that just to make it funny. So, yeah. I don't know if anyone really was worried about that, but if you were, there you go. And those are technically the main issues in the movie, but there's something else I need to address. And this is something I was entirely unaware of until like a few months after the movie was made and premiered. And I don't really want to mention this because I didn't think I'd ever mention this on the channel in any capacity, but I think it's important to mention it just in case there's somebody who was turned off by this who just never said anything. You may notice that Thomas is very, very animated and very mobile in this movie. He can move without rails. And if that sounds eerily familiar to you, that might be because that is exactly what he can do in Thomas and Friends All Engines Go, the new Thomas show from Mattel Television. I have heard very much things about this show, and I can see what's going on here. They're trying to do, like, the Ren and Stimpy approach. Like, you know, like when back, like, you know how in the 80s, like, after Muppet Babies, everybody tried making their characters kids or babies? That kind of became a thing. Well, nowadays, it's basically that with Ren and Stimpy, because Ren and Stimpy was, like, very unusual children's entertainment. And that was the, like, there was other ones before that, like, you can't do that on television, but Ren and Stimpy was the one to really break down the door, and that caused other shows like Rocco and Cat Dog and Cow and Chicken and SpongeBob, obviously. But eventually, the Ren and Stimpy formula would be applied to shows or franchises that were becoming, quote, stale. And I think the best example of that would be the Paul Rudish Mickey Mouse. And we all know how well that has done. So, here's the thing, though. Applying the Ren and Stimpy thing with, you know, gross out humor and, like, very expressive faces and surreal visuals and such, that only really works for certain properties, and Thomas, I'm going to admit, in my eyes, it just doesn't work. I mean, I look at it, it seems like a harmless children's show. I've watched like an hour of this shit, I don't know why, but, yeah, needless to say, I can see why a lot of people don't like this. It just does not work with Thomas. I could see, like, somebody at Mattel thinking that Thomas might be a bit too old-fashioned. But if you ask me, I think that's part of the timelessness, the charm of Thomas. That's what makes him very timeless. It's a very chill show. I mean, there is some chaos, don't get me wrong, but it's just like, you know. Now, I should point out that All Engines Go isn't a complete Ren and Stimpy-esque show. I mean, there's no gross out or surreal visuals, but I mean, it's the closest kind of scenario I can compare it to, considering how different the original Thomas was, so that's what I mean by that. I think the one thing is that you break convention that they're trains. I mean, in this show, Thomas is flipping around, he can drive off the rails, and it's, yeah, needless to say, it's exactly what happened in Thomas and the Quest for Job. Now, I need to make it very clear that I was unaware that they moved like this in All Engines Go when making Thomas and the Quest for Job. I was aware of the show. At the very least, I saw scenes of them picking up stuff with their wheels. They basically turned Thomas into cars. That's how I could put it. But, yes, I was unaware that they were able to move off of the tracks. So, yes, I want to point out that that was 100% a coincidence. I did not take inspiration from All Engines Go. I don't want anybody to think that. That was purely coincidental. And besides, I kind of gave more reason. Thomas was built by Lou in the Thomas and the Quest for Job universe, and for that reason, he wasn't built like the other engines on that island. Thomas specifically says this. So while he can do this, Percy can't, for example. In fact, I think All Engines Go even addressed at one point that they can't go anywhere without rails, even though that's not true in the show. But again, I'm not gonna complain about it. You know, that's not my battleground. I've got other things to do. But needless to say, I'm just not the target audience for this. I am sticking with my radio-controlled Thomas. But yes, I gotta point that out. All Engines Go did not inspire Thomas's animated movement in Thomas and the Quest for Job. That was purely coincidental. I cannot stress that enough. And with that, that's it. that concludes this behind-the-scenes video on the making of Thomas and the Quest for Job. I hope you all enjoyed it. Maybe you learned a thing or two from this. And, again, if you have not seen the movie, I don't know why you watched this. You're probably totally confused. So, yeah, be sure to check that out, or rewatch it, whatever floats your boat. If you want to check out the rough draft, be my guest, but I warn you, it's not pleasant for the eyes. If you thought the final movie was weird, trust me, the rough draft is a million times weirder. Also, if you think you know everything there is to know about Thomas and the Quest for Job, why not try out the Kahoot I made? I'll leave a link to that in the description below. And of course, I'll leave links to the Buff Thomas mod I made for the movie, if anybody has any sort of use for that. I'm not sure what kind of use, but whatever you can think of, I suppose. And the fixed version of the Word Up-Down script for 3D Movie Maker Animation Pro. So, yes, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll be seeing you all soon.